Well, good morning and thank you for coming along. Normally I'm involved at the sharp end of the research in the laboratories that Gary and Lynn have just described, but recently, last year, we got the chance to be involved with a feasibility study for the Water Research Park, which is planned for Scotland and is obviously very much a part of the Hydro Nation agenda. And this was funded by the Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and I'm just going to describe the findings of our feasibility study. So the aim was to simply conduct this study and find out what the state of national research and national interest and national activity was in Scotland in the area of water. And we had a remit which we agreed with the steering panel, which included members of the government and also Highlands and Islands Enterprise and other key stakeholders, including Scottish Water. And part of the work was to generate a map showing exactly who was active where and what they were doing, what resources we had at our disposal for our recommendations and what shape a research park should have. Although one question that we did establish was definitely on the menu was whether we should have one at all. If you're conducting research, a null hypothesis is always essential, and one possible outcome was that we shouldn't have one, but that was quickly dismissed. So we began the research with a large survey which we sent out to a lot of people, universities, SMEs, government bodies. And we sent questionnaires out to anyone who we could possibly identify as having an interest in a water research facility, park, whatever you wanted to call it. We also had two large workshops. One was principally for SMEs and the other was principally for university and academic workers. And these were fairly substantial events. They were 5 or 6 hours long in Glasgow, and we kicked this off with a morning round and an afternoon round, and we invited as much frank discussion as we could, and we got plenty of it. We also conducted our own research based on what we could find on the internet and what our company contacts and industry contacts and government contacts could tell us. There were lots of drivers for innovation in water areas in Scotland, and certainly we are active in many of them. Some of the drivers are related to policy. Some are handed down to us. Some are generated from within. Some are encountered in the course of daily practice. And we found that we had unanimous stakeholder support at every level for a facility like this in Scotland. We also discovered, as part of our research, that other countries around the world were already active in this area and had their own versions of a water research park. Some were very good, some were very different to anything that we would propose, but they were all doing something. And if you have a look at the percentage of GDP spent, Scotland definitely was lagging behind. And partly that will be historic. There was no real need for us to spend much more than that because we've got plenty of water. So we didn't have to spend as much as other countries in managing it. But that will change. It'll change because of legislation, and it'll change because of changing demographics, and it'll change because of water conservation, and it'll change because of the climate. Now, that change might happen in 5 years or 10 or 15 or 20, but change is coming. And eventually, we will be spending a lot more on research as a percentage of our GDP than we do at the moment. The question is, do we lead that change, or do we get dragged by the scruff of the neck through it? And obviously, you'll get better value for money if you lead the change and manage the process. So we generated masses of data. That's an example of some of the things that we were looking at. We categorised things as much as we could, and we looked at who was doing what, where, nationally and internationally, to see what we could learn. Some of the lessons were, I suppose, expected. Some of the lessons were quite surprising. I thought there would be more people involved in international level standards research, but there isn't. There's only a couple. Probably the reason for this is it's very, very expensive, and things change internationally quite rapidly, and trying to keep up with that is a very expensive process. I certainly have had experience of that here with some of the products that we've worked on and done some extensive research for over the years. Trying to break into a foreign market is very, very difficult. The national standards are normally set up to be against such a thing as their default position. Some of the better ideas were the funding practices. Some organisations, particularly the Dutch model, had some very clever ways of getting funding in from private and government sources. Some of them offered prizes for research, and these prizes didn't need to be very big. €1,000 is a token amount when you're involved in research with anything to do with water. In my experience, you'll be starting at £500,000 and going sharply north from there. But it does attract the interest of many early career researchers. It carries a lot of weight, and so they're attracting good minds to this activity, and that's a good practice. So we did find some things that we expected and some things that we didn't expect from these stakeholder workshops. So from all that, it's quite clear that we've got to spot what's best and do that and capitalise on what we've got. We don't have the money to go spending £10 million on something brand new when there are good activities going on that we can plug into nationally and internationally as well. It was also an outcome, a possible outcome of our feasibility study, that a lot, perhaps most of the facilities that would be required and the expertise may be cheaper if we bought them from abroad. And that certainly is something that was apparent from what we were doing. A lot of it we can do in-house. Some of it, if it's better to do it abroad, then do it abroad. We wanted the best that we could get as our recommendations, as the foundation for our recommendations for a water research park. The aim here is to launch research with more vigour than we see at the moment. So, what did the workshops show up as indicators of gaps that were perceived? Well, there was a range of facilities available. These were uncoordinated, and SMEs told us they didn't have time to wade through all of the information that was available to quickly find what would give them the most efficient access to funding or resources. It was just a bewildering array, and they didn't have time. That's what they said. There are plenty of places available for funding. SETN, the Hutton Institute, Scotland Europa, Scottish Enterprise. But they didn't have time to sit down and draw up a spreadsheet that evaluated all these and told them what was the best one to go for. So very often they didn't. That's what they said. So this was definitely a surprise to me, and definitely a surprise, I think, to most of the people conducting the study. I didn't expect quite that degree of confusion to be apparent on the ground, so to speak. What potentially could be available if things were running as well as we would like? Well, regardless of how we tried to model the shortfall in Scotland's output and research, it was significant. We could do a lot better by several different analysis techniques. It showed up that there were definitely shortfalls. We weren't earning as much money as we could. We didn't have as much international presence as we could. We didn't have the research output that we could. If all the SME ideas, if all that activity was somehow coupled better to output, we could do better than we are at the moment. What options did we have? Well, the option of building something fantastic out at Gogarburn or something is really, really a great idea, but it's far too expensive. It could never be justified. So the most common international model seemed very attractive to us. That was the hub and spoke model. You have something big, some big operator in the middle, and distributed spokes, and these would be distributed certainly across, well, in European models, it's tens of kilometres, sometimes 100 kilometres or more, and in different countries, and that seems to work very well for them. And there's no reason to suspect that it wouldn't work just as well for us. Or create a new dedicated facility. Well, that didn't fly 10 different ways. It just couldn't be justified. So somewhere along the upgrading and utilisation of existing sites and morphing them into some kind of hub and spoke facility was definitely the favourite option. Physical attributes, well, we had a wish list from the SMEs, which was probably as long as you would make the workshop last. A popular one was prototype scale development, where they would hire a lab and test some scale model. That's certainly what we've enjoyed here at Heriot-Watt University in our drainage facilities. The big laboratories that we've got here are excellent for testing things out on a product development scale. Product certification was another one, but that tends to be very, very expensive. I think they were surprised at how much we had to charge because of full economic costing. It's very, very expensive to hire university facilities. And that's because of all the additional costs which nowadays are recognised and reflected in what we have to charge. Although we did find in the workshops that there was no reluctance to spending lots of money on R&D work. And in fact, there was a lot of money being spent which wasn't being spent efficiently. Sometimes the same thing was being discovered in different places at the same time. And that became apparent to Gary and me as we sat in these workshops. it became apparent that money was being spent, but not as wisely as it could be. Clustering of expertise, staff training, that's something that also goes on at the moment, but in an ad hoc fashion, despite the availability of networks like SETN, the Hutton Institute, Scotland Europa. Despite all these things, and there are several of them available, despite all these things, things don't work as efficiently as you would think. Virtual networking, that also goes on, but that could be done much better as well. Technology transfer was also mentioned. That's something that we've done a bit of here. Other universities do it as well. But that could probably be done better. For instance, again, coming back to the Dutch model, they've got a very strong link with local industries. And they integrate this into their education stream very well. They'll have 30 or 40 nationwide coordinated MSc students, for instance, who are shared in a pool, and they will get things out to market, probably more efficiently than we are doing here. So, developing some facility, should it arise, coordination and building strong links, obviously essential. Something along the lines of Crew Plus, as it was called in the steering group workshops. Something like Crew, only more active, more widespread, more efficient. Possibly led by an enterprise organisation, and a steering group independent of any other interested parties was also mentioned at both workshops. Brand name, very important. Marketing in these international sites that we looked at, very strong. Developing promotional material, well, these websites that you can look at online internationally, very slick. Obviously coordinated, obviously had a lot of money spent on them. We've already got very good things going on here that we should incorporate and capitalise on. Wastewater, and this came up in both workshops as well, wastewater should be considered as an activity in its own right. Whereas I think at the moment the assumption would be that it would be not mentioned as an activity in its own right, which seems rather odd, because it is an activity which has its own problems and its own challenges. And I've currently got some EPSRC funding to look at wastewater and the consequences of water conservation, and that's been mentioned today already. Water conservation has to be practiced. It has to be done. In fact, it will be legislated for soon. So it is coming, it is a good idea, and we do have to do it. But we do have to manage it. You can't just cut down the amount of water you send through the infrastructure by 40% and expect everything to arrive at the treatment plant the way that the treatment plant was designed for 13, 40 years ago. It might work, but it might not. We don't know at the moment. Aligning the supply chain with the needs of industry is a very critical step. Scottish Water are already highly active in that, and we could probably do more to help them do even better. And we need a network of Tier 1 users, as they were called, but SETN's already, Scottish Environmental Technology Network, is already doing a good job there. Well, what could the research part do to help them do an even better job? product innovation. Well, that's what I've had first-hand experience of for a couple of decades now. It takes longer than you think. It's harder than you think, and it costs a lot more than you would think to get something accepted in the water industry than perhaps other industries. People are very reluctant to have change in the water industry, and that to a certain extent is a good thing. But if it takes an inordinate length of time, then you're missing some tricks. And that is something that the research part would be able to perhaps help to short circuit and get good ideas and good practices out into public common practice. And the rest of it was pretty much as we expected: access to demonstration sites, more affordable access to laboratories. Well, our prices are fixed. Full economic costing means that it is very expensive to hire university laboratory site. So the only help in getting people more affordable laboratory space would come in the form of government subsidies. So for every £1 someone spent on our lab, perhaps someone would contribute £1 or something to that, so that matched funding would bring the cost of research down. And more engagement with the higher education sector. Well, we're already making inroads into that, because the coupling between research and teaching is growing in importance, and it's something that we take very seriously here, and we practice that a lot, and we do couple our teaching to industrial research. We have students contributing to papers, we have students contributing to industrial research where confidentiality allows. We do build it into the teaching programme, and that's growing, not just in this university but in others, and that's a very good thing. All in all, we had about 16 recommendations. The cheapest option that we could confidently and feasibly offer was about £600,000 to pull together a research park, which would be a distributed network across several sites. We would use Scottish Water, and they were a willing partner in this. We would use one of their sites as the hub of a demonstration site. Existing activities such as the SETN network would be incorporated as much as possible into this. And we would also recommend to the Scottish Funding Council that their next call for proposals should feature an option for that as part of the recommendations. So all in all, we drew up, to summarise, a table of who was doing what in what areas, and that formed the basis of our presentation to the Scottish Government, funded by the Highlands and Islands Enterprise as part of our feasibility study for the Water Research Park. That's it. Thank you very much.